The noon train was still bleeding steam onto the platform when Crandall Dorrance looked at the woman who'd come all that way for him and said, loud enough for the whole town to hear, that he'd sent for a wife, and they'd shipped him a hired hand by mistake. I was 19 that summer, holding 2 horses by the depot rail while Eli Brennan settled accounts over a coil of wire and a sack of cracked corn, and I'll tell you, I have lived a long while since and buried most of the men who stood on that platform, but I have never forgotten the sound of it. The crowd had come the way crowds do when a man like Dorrance announces he's bringing a bride out from back east. Half of Ramsey Wells turned out in their good shirts to see what money could order through the mail. They wanted a picture come to life, a soft thing, young with a parasol and a small laugh. What stepped down off the car was a woman near 35 with a plain, strong face and a traveling dress gone gray at the cuffs, and hands, I saw them when she gripped the rail to come down the iron steps, hands that had worked. Knuckles swollen a little, a long pale seam of an old scar running across the back of the right one, nails cut short and square. A working woman's hands. She set one boot on the planking and looked around at all those faces looking at her, and she did not flinch. Dorrance flinched for the both of them. He'd put on a new coat for the occasion and he wore it like armor, and I watched the welcome go right out of his face, watched it curdle into something cold and embarrassed, because a man like that is most afraid of being laughed at. He looked at her hands and her gray cuffs, and the lines the sun had already started at the corners of her eyes, and he looked at his neighbors looking, and he made his choice. "There's been a mistake," he said. She'd set her one trunk down beside her and she stood very straight. "Mr. Dorrance," she said. Her voice was low and even, no East Coast lilt to it, just plain American. "I'm Tamsin Caro. We've exchanged 6 letters." "I corresponded with a lady," he said, and let the word hang there nasty. "And the lady I corresponded with did not see fit to mention she was past her bloom and built for a plow. I don't know what you think happens here, ma'am, but I'm a man of standing in this country, and I'll not be made a fool of in front of it. I have seen men strike each other and seen worse than that done with words, and I am telling you the cruelty of it was in how careful he was, how he made sure each piece landed where the crowd could enjoy it." A few of the men laughed. A woman near me put her glove to her mouth, but it was a laughing kind of horror, not the helping kind. Tamsin Caro did not weep. She did not beg. That is the part I want you to understand before I tell you the rest, because everything that came after that day turned on it. A lesser soul would have crumbled and a meaner one would have screamed, and either would have been forgiven by that crowd, even enjoyed. She did neither. She looked at Crandall Dorrance for a long, level moment, the way you look at a horse that's gone mean from bad handling, measuring, not hatting, and then she said, "Then I'll trouble you only for the return fare you promised in your 4th letter, and we'll call the matter closed." "I promised no such thing." He had, of course. She'd have had the letter folded in her bag, but he had the standing and the money and the friends, and she had a trunk and a scar across her hand, and they all knew which way that arithmetic ran. He turned on his heel and his foreman went with him, and the crowd, having gotten what it came for, began to thin and drift and talk, leaving the woman standing alone in the middle of the platform with the steam thinning off the train behind her, and not one soul stepping up to carry her trunk or her trouble. I looked at Eli. I'd hired on at the Brennan place that spring, and I'd already learned that Eli Brennan was a man you measured in what he didn't say. He'd lost his wife 3 years back, Maddie, her name had been, though I never heard him say it but twice the whole time I knew him. And folks said that before that he'd been an easier man, that he'd laughed and bred the finest saddle horses in the Soldado Mesa country, and that Maddie could gentle a colt with her voice alone. After she died of the lung fever, he'd gone hard and quiet, and the ranch had gone with him, sliding a little more each season, good stock sold off to meet the notes, the corrals he'd built so proud standing half empty. He was 38 and looked older, and he spoke to his horses more than he spoke to people, and I had not, in a season of working for him, once seen him put himself forward into another man's business. He set down the sack of corn. He didn't say anything to me. He walked across the dirt and up the 2 steps onto the platform with that flat-footed range walk of his, and he stopped in front of Tamsin Caro, and he took off his hat. I want it noted he took off his hat. There were married deacons in that crowd who hadn't. "Ma'am," he said, "I run a horse outfit east of here along Antelope Draw. Brennan's the name. I've got a place that needs a hand worse than I can say and nobody fool enough to take the wages I can pay." He turned the hat brim in his fingers, the only sign he gave that the words cost him. "I'm not offering what that man offered. I'm not offering a thing but honest work, your own room with a door that locks from the inside, and a wage when I've got it and my word when I haven't. You'd be hired, plain and clear, and you could leave it any day you took a notion. But I won't stand here and watch this town leave a body stranded, and I've got a roof, so." She looked at him the way she'd looked at Dorrance measuring. But it was a different measure. I saw her take in the worn cuffs of his own shirt, the honest dust on him, the way he held the hat like a man who'd learned manners from a woman now gone. I think she could read men the way she read horses, which is to say she could tell the difference between a man who was managing her and a man who simply could not abide what he'd just seen. "You don't know me," she said. "No, ma'am." I might be exactly what he said. "You might," Eli agreed. "I've got horses that'll tell me quick enough what you are. They're better judges than that street. And here is the thing I will carry to my own grave." At that moment, there came from the stock pens beyond the depot a high, scared screaming. One of the railroad's remount horses, a big ugly bay that had come off the cattle cars half wild, was throwing itself against the rails of the holding corral, had been all the while we stood there, and now it had gotten a foreleg up over the lower rail and was about to break it or hang itself. 2 of the railroad men were in the pen with ropes, and they were making it worse, hollering and slapping, and the bay was rolling its eye white and going up. Tamsin Caro set down her bag. She didn't run. That was the first lesson she ever taught me without meaning to, though I didn't know yet it was a lesson. She walked, slow and slantwise, never straight at the animal, and she started talking before she ever got to the rails, not loud, not soft, just a steady low river of sound, the words of it not mattering, only the going on of it. She told the railroad men to get out of the pen, and something in how she said it made them do it. And then she eased up to that screaming bay one slow step at a time, her scarred hand out flat and low, and she kept on with that low, steady talk. And I watched a horse that had been trying to kill itself for 10 minutes get its leg back down over the rail on its own, get all 4 feet under it, and stand there blowing and trembling while a plain stranger laid her palm flat on its sweating neck like she was laying a hand on a frightened child. The platform had gone dead quiet behind us, even the ones who'd laughed. Eli Brennan stood there with his hat still in his hand and watched her gentle that animal, and I saw something move across his face that I hadn't seen there in the whole time I'd known him. It wasn't a smile. It was further back than a smile. It was a man recognizing something he'd thought was gone out of the world. She came back to her trunk. The bay watched her go, ears forward now, gentled. "My father was a horse doctor," she said, like it was an apology, like she owed the platform an explanation for who she was. "In Kentucky and then Missouri. I doctored stock alongside him from the time I could walk until the day he died this past winter. That's the whole of my recommendation, Mr. Brennan, and it's the thing your Mr. Dorrance found so unfit." She picked up her bag. "The room locks from the inside, you said." "It does." "Then I'll take the work." And that was how Tamsin Caro came to the Brennan place, not as anybody's bride. Not bought and not begged for, but hired plain and clear off a platform where a proud man had thrown her away. And I have lived long enough to see a good many things turn out crooked, but I am glad past saying that I was there to see this one turn out straight. We loaded her trunk in the wagon and started the long pull east toward Antelope Draw, the 3 of us on the seat with the dry country opening up gold and gray ahead of us, the Soldado Mesa standing off blue to the south, and nobody said much of anything the whole way. But Eli drove with his back a little straighter than it had been that morning, and once, when we forded the low water at Coyote Wash. The team balked at the wet and Tamsin Caro leaned out and made a small click of her tongue and they walked across like lambs. And Eli looked at her sidelong and she looked straight ahead and neither of them said a word. And I sat between them feeling like a fence post that had wandered into church. The Brennan place, when we came up on it in the long light, was a hard sight for proud eyes. The house was sound but small, the barn good but the paint long gone, and the corrals, there were 6 of them, beautiful work. Eli'd built them in his easier days, stood 3/4 empty, with maybe a dozen horses left where there'd once been 60. A blue roan stud, getting on but still the king of the place. A handful of mares. And in the smallest pen, off by itself, a leggy 2-year-old colt, dark as a thundercloud, that flung itself at the far rail the second the wagon rolled into the yard and stood there snorting and wild-eyed and dangerous. "That one," Eli said, the first thing he'd offered unasked in 20 miles, "you stay clear of. He's killed nothing yet but he's tried. Matty raised his dam." He stopped, like the name had got away from him. "My wife. She raised his dam, gentle as you please. This one came after she after. I never had the hand for him she'd have had. He's no good to anybody now." Tamsin looked at the colt for a long time as we unloaded. The colt looked back at her, ears pinned, the whites of its eyes showing. "He's not no good," she said. "He's just never had a reason to believe a hand." And she carried her own trunk into the house, scar and all, and did not let me take the heavy end. That was the first day. I'll get to the sickness, and to Dorrance, and to the part where the whole proud valley came crawling to the woman it had thrown off a train. That's coming, and I want you to have it. But you have to understand the slow part first, the long, bright autumn part, because it's where the real thing was built, and the real thing wasn't the saving of the horses, big as that got. The real thing was quieter than that. She turned the place around inside a month. And she did it without ever once making Eli feel turned around. That's a gift rarer than the one she had with the animals, and I've thought about it a good deal in the years since. A man who's grieved himself into a corner and let his life slide doesn't want to be rescued. Rescuing him just shows him how far he's fallen, and shame is no kind of foundation. But Tamsin Caro never rescued anybody. She just worked, plain and steady and visible, and she let the work do its own arguing. The first morning she was up before me, and I'm an early riser. By the time I came out, she had the sick yearling. We had a yearling filly with a cough that Eli had half given up on, figuring it for the start of something bad. She had that filly haltered, and had built a little tent of sacking over a steaming bucket of something bitter she'd boiled out of the medicines in her trunk, and she had the filly's nose down in the steam of it, breathing, calm as you please. 3 days and the cough was gone. She found the foot rot starting in 2 of the mares before Eli or I had seen the limp. She had a way of running her scarred hand down a horse's leg that found the heat in it before there was anything to see. She mixed a paste of pine tar and something else and bound their feet, and they came sound. She looked at the blue roan stud, the old king, and told Eli his teeth wanted floating. The old horse was dropping half-chewed wads of hay, quitting, she called it, losing weight on full feed because his back teeth had grown points that cut his cheeks, and she floated them herself with a rasp out of her trunk, talking to the old stud the whole while, and inside 2 weeks he'd put weight back on his ribs and carried his head higher. Eli watched all this. He didn't say much, but I noticed he started lingering at whatever she was doing, finding work near her, the way a body will, holding a horse's head while she worked the far end, fetching the hot water before she asked. And I noticed she started leaving him the small dignities a proud man needs. She'd ask him which mare to dose first, though she plainly knew. She'd say, "If you think best," about a thing she'd already decided. She made him part of the saving instead of the saved. I was 19, and I thought it was just good manners. It took me years to understand it was something close to kindness's highest form, which is to help a person without ever once letting them feel helped. The town did not soften the way the ranch did. Word of it got around, of course, Brennan taken and the Dorrance bride, the rejected one, the one with the plow hands. The first time we drove into Ramsey Wells for supplies after, you'd have thought we'd brought the smallpox. The mercantile went quiet when Tamsin came in. The deacon's wife gathered her skirts, and Dorrance himself was outside the bank when we came out with 2 of his men, and he made sure to be heard. "Brennan," he called across the street, friendly as poison. "I see charity's cheaper than a real hand these days. She earn her keep or just eat it." I felt Eli go still beside me. I'd never seen him in a fight, and I didn't want to against 3. But it was Tamsin who answered, and she answered easy, not loud, settling the parcels in the wagon bed without even turning full around. "She earns it, Mr. Dorrance," she said. "Same as I'd have earned my keep at your place if you'd been man enough to want a wife who could keep one. How's that gray stud of yours, the one you paid the Denver money for, still favoring the off-hind?" Dorrance's face did a thing, because his prize gray was favoring the off-hind, and only his own foreman knew it, and now half the street had heard a thrown-away woman name it from across the road without ever laying eyes on the animal. "You stay off my land and away from my stock," he said, but it came out thinner than he wanted. "Gladly," said Tamsin Caro, and climbed up onto the wagon seat, and we drove home. "That gray stud is going to matter. Hold on to him." The colt is where the wall between Eli and Tamsin came down, so I'll tell that next. The Thundercloud colt, Eli never named him, couldn't, on account of the dam being the last thing his wife ever raised. That colt was a misery to everyone. He'd run the fence till his shins bled. He'd lunge at a man over the rails. Eli had it in his mind to sell him cheap to a rough string outfit that bought such horses to be broken hard or shot, and I think it shamed Eli to think it, because it was Maddie's blood, but he couldn't stand the daily sight of the animal's wild eye, which was too much like a grief he couldn't fix. Tamsin started on the colt without telling anybody she'd started. She just took to eating her noon bread sitting on a bucket outside his pen, not looking at him. Just there, day after day, a presence at the edge of his trouble, the same low going on of talk she'd used on the railroad bay, only there was nothing wrong now, no crisis, just a woman eating bread and saying nothing in particular in a voice like slow water. The colt would charge the rails and she wouldn't move. He'd snort and stamp and she'd take another bite. After about a week he came over once out of pure curiosity and snatched the bread right out of her hand and bolted, and she laughed. The first time I ever heard her laugh, and Eli, who happened to be in the barn mouth, heard it too, and I saw him stop dead and stand there listening to it like a man hearing a sound he'd forgotten the world made. It took her till the leaves turned to put a hand on that colt. But the night she finally haltered him, gentle, no fight, the colt dropping his nose into the halter she held like he'd been waiting his whole short, angry life for somebody to offer it without a rope behind it. She came up to the house and knocked on the door of Eli's office where he did his accounts, and she said, "Come see something." We all 3 went out in the blue dark with a lantern. And there in the small pen stood the Thundercloud colt, haltered, calm, and Tamsin led him in a quiet circle around her with 2 fingers on the lead like he was a child's pony. And Eli Brennan stood at the rail and made a sound I won't try to spell, a sound that came up out of the worst buried part of him, and he turned away into the dark so we wouldn't see his face. Tamsin handed me the lead. "Walk him to cool," she said quiet, and went to where Eli stood with his back to us, and she didn't touch him, just stood near the way she stood near a frightened horse, and after a while I heard him talking. Lo, I caught only pieces leading the colt around in the dark. He told her about Maddie, about the colt's dam, the mare his wife had raised up gentle, and how Maddie used to say a horse never lies about how it's been treated, you only have to learn to read it. He told her he'd let the place go because every good thing in it had Maddie's hand on it, and he couldn't bear to keep her hand alive while she wasn't. And Tamsin Caro, who had every reason in the world to be hard, who'd been thrown off a train into the dirt by a proud man not 3 months before, stood in the dark and let a grieving stranger talk about a love that wasn't hers and would never be hers, and when he finally ran dry, she said only, She'd be glad the colt got gentled, whoever does it. Whoever does it. She gave it back to him, you see. She'd done the work and she handed him the comfort. I've turned that over 1,000 nights since and it still undoes me. After that they were easy with each other in a way that had no name yet. He started calling her Tamsin instead of ma'am. She started cooking the noon meal for all three of us instead of leaving us to our own cold biscuit. And she was no kind of fancy cook, but it was hot and there was always enough. And Eli, who'd eaten standing up at the counter for 3 years, sat down to a table again. One evening she had a tear in her good coat and he took it off the peg while she was at the barn and clumsily, with a man's big hands, set the stitches himself and hung it back and never said, and she never said, but she wore it knowing. Small things. The realest things are small. A coat mended without a word. A name said gentle. A chair pulled out. I was watching 2 grown people who'd each had the wanting beaten out of them learn, slow as the colt learned the halter, that a hand could be offered with nothing cruel behind it. The sickness came in the last week of October, and it came first to Dorrance. I'll tell it the way it happened, because the order of it matters to what kind of woman she was. A boy rode out from town near dark on a spent horse, the Hadlock boy. His daddy ran cattle north of Dorrance's spread, and he was looking for Tamsin by name, which tells you something already, because the valley that wouldn't sell her flour was now sending a child 14 miles in the dark to find her. The Hadlock horses were dying. 3 down already, more sick, going down with a fever and a swelling under the jaw, and then a thing in the chest that drowned them on dry land, and the same was running through Dorrance's stable, and the Prout place beyond, and nobody'd ever seen the like. And the boy's daddy said the boy stumbled over it, ashamed to carry the message. His daddy said the Brennan woman doctored stock. Didn't she, and would she come? Eli looked at Tamsin across the lamplight. You don't owe that valley one thing, he said. He meant it. There was no test in it. He'd have backed her either way. Tamsin was already pulling her trunk out from under the bed. The horses didn't throw me off the train, she said. Whit, harness the team and load every clean sack and every kettle we've got. Eli, I need lime, all the quicklime in the county if we can get it, and I need men who'll do exactly what I say and not one thing more. She stopped just once and looked at the boy, who was about ready to fall down. What color's the swelling on them, son? Under the jaw, is it hard like a stone, or does it give? Gives, ma'am. Some of 'em it's broke open. Something in her loosened a hair's breadth. Then we've got a chance with the ones not down yet. Its strangle's gone bad, and it's the bad cousin of it that goes to the chest, but it's not the other thing I feared. Whit, the team. Now. I have never in my life worked the way I worked the next 9 days, and I have never seen anyone work the way Tamsin Caro worked them. She'd seen it before, you understand. Her father had ridden out into an outbreak like this in Missouri when she was a girl, and she'd ridden with him, and she carried it in her hands. She knew the new sick from the dying, and she knew there was no saving the worst gone, but there was real saving in the rest if you were quick and ruthless and clean. She split the sick from the well with a hard line. That was the first thing, and the men hated it, because it meant moving prize animals out into the cold away from the barns, but she would not be moved on it. The sickness ran on shared troughs and shared air and a man's own hands carrying it horse to horse, and she made every man scrub to the elbow and lie between animals till their skin cracked, and she limed the stalls, and she lanced the swellings under the jaw when they were ripe and ready and drew the poison clean, and the ones drowning in the chest she steamed the way she'd steamed our yearling, tented over bitter kettles, and she sat up with the worst herself, all night, more than one night. Her scarred hands never still. And the men did exactly what she said. That's the part that still strikes me. These were proud men, ranchers who'd never in their lives taken an order from a woman, men who'd stood on that platform and laughed or near enough. And inside 2 days they were running for hot water when Tamsin Caro lifted a finger, scrubbing till they bled because she told them to, moving their best stock at midnight because she said the line had to hold. Because she was right, And a man watching his horses die learns fast to tell the difference between somebody managing him and somebody who can actually save the thing he loves. Crandall Dorrance held out the longest, which figures. She'd saved the Hadlock string down to the last new sick colt before Dorrance broke. He'd been treating his own with a horseleech up from the rail town, a fool with a black bottle, and he'd lost 4 head, including a brood mare worth more than my year's wage. And on the 5th day his Denver gray, the prize, the off-hind gray, you remember, went down with the fever and the stone swelling hard and tight under its jaw, the dangerous kind, the kind that can choke an animal dead before it ripens. He came to the Hadlock place where we were working at dusk, on foot, leading the gray, and that gray was the most beautiful piece of horseflesh I ever saw or ever will, dappled like wet slate, and it was dying on its feet, and Crandall Dorrance, who had standing in that country and money and the whole town's good opinion, stood at the edge of the lantern light holding the lead rope of his finest animal and could not make himself come forward. Tamsin was elbow-deep in a Hadlock colt and didn't look up. "You can bring him into the far pen, Mr. Dorrance," she said, "or you can stand there and watch him strangle. It's a long way to choke, and it's not a thing I'd want a horse I valued to do alone." He brought the gray forward. His voice, when it came, had nothing left in it of the platform. "Can you do anything?" She looked then, looked at the swelling, ran her hand along the gray's throat, felt the thing under the jaw, hard and high and tight, and I saw her go grave. "It's not ripe. If I cut it now I'll likely kill him, and if I wait for it to ripen on its own he'll choke first. There's a third way, and it's a near thing, and I won't promise it." She wiped her hands. "I can poultice it hot and hard through the night and try to draw it to head by morning, and if it comes to a head by morning I can lance it and he may live. It means somebody sits with him every minute, steam in his face, and the poultice changed warm every half hour, all the night, and his head held up so he can breathe whatever the swelling leaves him. That somebody is you, Mr. Dorrance, because I've 11 head on the Hadlock line and the Prout place beyond that, and I cannot spend your night for you. I will tell you what I saw, because I was there and few were. I saw Crandall Dorrance, in his good coat gone filthy, sit on the cold ground all that night with his dying gray's head in his lap, holding it up so the animal could breathe, while a woman he'd thrown off a train moved between the pens with a lantern, coming back to him every half hour to change the hot poultice with her own scarred hands and check the swelling and say, "Not yet," and hold him up higher and once. Near the worst hour before dawn, when the gray was fighting for every breath and Dorrance was weeping openly, not caring who saw, she crouched down in the cold beside the proud man and the dying horse, and she said, gentle as she'd ever said anything, "Talk to him. He's scared. He doesn't know you can't fix it any more than he can. Just let him hear you're there." And Crandall Dorrance bent his head down over the only thing in the world he'd ever managed to love without conditions and talked to it through the dark. The swelling came to a head an hour after sunup. Tamsin lanced it clean. I held the lantern, my hands shaking, her steady as a rock, and the poison ran out of it, and the gray, who'd been a breath from gone, gave a great shuddering sigh and dropped its head and slept and lived. Dorrance couldn't speak. He sat there in the dirt with the gray's slobber and the poison and the dirt all over his ruined coat, and he looked up at Tamsin Caro, and whatever he tried to say wouldn't come. "He'll mend now," she said, not unkind but not soft either. "Keep him from the others 2 weeks more. Scrub before you touch the well stock." She stood and pressed her hand to the small of her back, and I saw how gray she'd gone herself, how worn down to the bone, 9 days of it, and she picked up her kit. "I've got to get to the Prout place. They've a mare foaling sick and it can't wait." "Mrs. Caro," he got it out finally, his proud voice in pieces. Miss Caro, what do I owe you?" She looked at him a long moment, and the whole platform was in that look, the whole laughing street, the gloved hand at the mouth, the trunk left in the dirt, and she could have had anything. She could have named a sum to ruin him or asked for his apology on his knees in front of the town, and he'd have given it right then in the dirt. I half wanted her to. I was 19 and I wanted the proud man brought low. "You owe me nothing," said Tamsin Caro. The horse owed me nothing either, and he's the one who suffered. I don't doctor stock to be paid in a man's comeuppance, Mr. Dorrance. I do it because my father did, and because the animals can't ask. Keep him clean and keep him quiet and we're square." And she walked to the wagon and got up on the seat and we drove to the Prout place, and I never in my life felt smaller or prouder to be sitting next to somebody. She lost 11 head across the whole valley over those 9 days, and that was 11 too many for her. She carried each one. But she saved better than 40, including most of the best blood in the Soldado Mesa country. And there was not a ranch from Antelope Draw to the river that hadn't sent for her by name and watched her work, and learned the size of the mistake the town had made on a platform back in August. It changed after that. Not all at once and not all the way, people are slow and pride is heavy, but it changed. The mercantile didn't go quiet anymore when she came in. The deacon's wife sent out a jar of preserves with a stiff little note. The Hadlocks named her godmother to their next born, which scandalized the proper folks and pleased me to no end. And Crandall Dorrance, well. A month on, when the gray was sound and shining, Dorrance rode out to the Brennan place alone, and he sat his horse in the yard and would not come down, and he said to Eli, but loud enough for Tamsin at the barn to hear, "I was a fool in front of the whole town, Brennan. I'll not pretend I wasn't. There's not a man in this valley doesn't know it now." He paused. "If she'll take stock to doctor, I'll pay her rate and recommend her to every outfit between here and Denver. And that's not charity. It's the plain market value of the best hand with a horse any of us ever saw, and I was too proud and too stupid to want her at my own table." He looked toward the barn. He didn't apologize to her face. He didn't have it in him, quite, and maybe she'd have refused to make him grovel anyway. But he tipped his hat toward the barn where she stood, the way Eli had tipped his on the platform, and he rode off. And that was as close to crawling as a man like that comes, and we all understood it for what it was. Now I have saved the smallest scene for the last, because it's the one that mattered most, and it happened the same evening Dorrance rode off humbled. Eli found her at the colt's pen in the last light, the thundercloud colt, gentled now, big and dark and following her around the pen loose like a dog. Eli came and leaned on the rail beside her, and I was at the barn mouth and I didn't mean to hear it, but the air carries in that dry country, and I'll not pretend I covered my ears. "Tamsin," Eli said. "Eli." He was quiet a while. He'd been quiet 3 years. It was his native tongue. "You could write your own ticket now," he said. "Whole valley wants you. You don't have to take a hired hand's wage from a played-out horse outfit that can't always pay it. You could go anywhere, set up proper. I wanted you to know that fair and square before and there he stuck, the way he'd stuck on the platform, turning a thing over in big hands that didn't know how to hold it." She waited. She was good at waiting. She'd waited out a wild colt and a dying horse and a whole cruel town. "Maddie's been gone 3 years, Eli said low. "And I told myself I'd buried the wanting with her, and I'd have sworn to you it was true, right up until a noon train in August. I'm not asking you because you saved my horses or because the valley wants you or because I've got nobody else. I'm a poor bet, Tamsin. I'm a hard man and a sad one, and the place isn't what it was. But I would be." The hat was in his hands again. I could see it even in the dusk, turning. "I'd be honored past saying if you'd quit being my hand and let me ask you to be my wife. Not because you've got nowhere to go. Because you've got everywhere to go now, and I'd like it more than I can say if you choose to stay." And that, you'll notice, was the whole of it, because you've got everywhere to go now. A proud man on a platform had wanted to own a soft ornament and been ashamed of a working woman. This hard man, 3 years grieving, offered her the asking only after she'd been made free to refuse it, only after the whole valley had handed her the power to walk out any door she pleased. He waited until she could choose with nothing at her back, no train fare she lacked, no trunk in the dirt, no town against her, and then he asked, hat in hand, and left the choosing entirely to her. Tamsin Caro looked at the gentled colt, and at the failing but mending ranch, and at the hard, quiet man holding his hat, and last of all she looked down at her own scarred working hand, the one a proud man had called unfit, resting easy on the top rail. "I doctored your filly the first morning I was here," she said, "before you decided whether to trust me. I floated the old stud's teeth and you watched me like I might steal them. I ate my bread by that colt's pen for 3 weeks and you thought I was wasting good dinner time." She turned to him. There was a thing in her face I'd not seen there, not on the platform, not through 9 days of dying horses, something that had been waiting a long time to be safe enough to show. "I made my choice a while back, Eli Brennan. I made it the day you took your hat off to me in front of a town that wouldn't, and I've been waiting on you to catch up." She put her scarred hand over his on the rail. "Yes, and I'll keep doctoring the valley besides, and you'll learn to like that because the animals can't ask and I won't stop. Those are my terms." "Those are good terms," Eli Brennan said, and his voice broke clean in two on the second word. They were married before the first snow, in the small house along Antelope Draw, and half the valley that had laughed on the platform came out to the wedding, hat in hand every one. Crandall Dorrance sent the Denver Gray as a gift, which Tamsin accepted because it was a fine horse, and refusing it would have cost the man more pride than she cared to take from anybody. And she bred that gray to the Thundercloud Colts line in later years, and got the finest saddle horses the Soldado Mesa country ever sold, finer than a lead raised in his proudest days. And she did it with Maddie's blood and Dorrance's gray and her own 2 hands. And there's a justice in that I never get tired of. I'm an old man now. Eli's been gone a long while, and Tamsin not so long, and I stayed on at that place my whole life. They made me family, the 2 of them, the way some people will reach down and pull a stray 19-year-old up into a life. I buried them both on the rise above Antelope Draw, next to a stone that says Maddie on it, and there was no jealousy in any of it, living or dead. Tamsin tended that first grave careful as her own garden, and used to say a heart that's loved once knows how to love bigger, not smaller, and that a man's first wife and his second can share a hill in peace if the man between them was the kind worth burying twice. She doctored stock in that valley for 30-some years. And toward the end of it, there wasn't a soul in 3 counties who remembered, or would admit they remembered that the best hand with a horse any of them ever knew had once been thrown off a train in front of the whole proud town, as not good enough to keep house. I remember it. I was the one holding the horses by the depot rail the day a hard, quiet man took off his hat to a woman the world had thrown away, and I have lived long enough to learn the lesson of it, which is the same lesson she taught a wild colt with bread and patience, and a hand offered with nothing cruel behind it. That worth is not a thing the proud get to decide from a platform. It's a thing that proves itself, given a roof and a reason to believe a hand, and that the men who can't see it are the ones who go home empty, while the man wise enough to take off his hat goes home, in the end, to everything.